Imagine waking up to the low, bone-rattling groan of diesel engines and strangers tearing into the soil around your home. A 6-foot-deep trench slowly surrounds you like a medieval siege. No warning, no permit, no way out. This is the real story of how a ruthless HOA tried to trap a homeowner on his own land, and how hidden cameras turned the tables. Friendly subscribe request. Before we dive into this unbelievable case, if you love real-life property battles and HOA drama caught on camera, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next shocking story. Narration begins. For more than 3 decades the land had been mine. 12 acres of stubborn Oklahoma soil, a modest ranch-style house rebuilt after storms, a wraparound porch overlooking fields of cottonwoods and deer trails. My father had taught me to fix engines and mend fences here. Every nail, every post carried a memory. The property wasn't fancy, but it was self-reliant. A deep private well, solar panels I'd installed piece by piece, and a workshop more like a command center than a shed. In a world obsessed with subdivisions and identical mailboxes, this was my refuge. That peace began to fracture 4 years earlier when developers rolled in with blueprints and glossy brochures promising a modern unified community experience. What they built instead was Sunny Hollow, boxy prefab houses squeezed onto quarter-acre plots with a perimeter fence that butted right up to my western boundary. At first I assumed it would stop there. It didn't. 2 months before the siege, a crisp white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just embossed initials, SHA. Sunny Hollow Homeowners Association. Inside was a typed offer to buy my land for community expansion, claiming fair compensation. I tossed it into the fire pit. 2 weeks later came another letter, same initials, but with a highlighted number, $600,000. To someone else it might have seemed generous. To me it was laughable. This land wasn't for sale. The pressure campaign escalated. HOA survey crews began appearing at the fence line with clipboards and measuring tapes, muttering about improvements. A spotless white SUV rolled up one afternoon and out stepped a pastel-clad HOA president radiating rehearsed smiles. She spoke of shared values and cohesive residential harmony. I stood firm. This was my bigger picture. She left a business card on my fence post like a claim stake, but drove away with the same deliberate slowness she'd arrived. Days passed. Then the surveillance began. Unmarked sedans parked for hours at the HOA edge, men in vests walking the perimeter, waving vaguely about drainage. The air felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. And then came the morning that sound ripped me from sleep. Diesel engines idling too close, the clank of a backhoe arm slamming into earth. I stepped outside barefoot in boots and saw dust clouds rising from machinery that had no business being there. 1 bulldozer, 2 backhoes, and a dump truck lined along my western fence. Men in hard hats moved like they were on a military schedule. And in the center of it all, wearing a reflective vest over her designer scarf, stood the HOA president herself, directing the operation as though it were a neighborhood picnic. The trench they were carving started 4 feet from my fence and ran deep, deeper than a foundation footing, widening by the minute. The machines looped the dig, moving to encircle my entire border. It wasn't routine drainage. It was entrapment disguised as construction. I could already see where it was headed. Once the full circle was complete, my only driveway to the county road would be gone. Inside my house, rage replaced disbelief. I called the sheriff's department, but the dispatcher treated it as a civil issue. A young deputy arrived, nodded a lot, and said he'd have to verify with the county. Meanwhile, the machines kept digging, and the HOA president smirked behind him, clipboard in hand like a victory flag. By nightfall the ditch ran like a scar along my property, 5 feet wide and deeper than I could measure. They parked a dump truck across my remaining exit, blocking deliveries, rerouting my mail to a distant drop box, and cutting off trash pickup. By Friday it wasn't just a trench. It was a moat. And inside it me. What the HOA didn't know was that I'd been preparing for years. Hidden cameras, motion-triggered, solar-powered trail cams disguised inside fence posts, birdhouses, even a garden gnome, synced to a private cloud server buried under my shed. Paranoid? Maybe. But growing up with tornadoes, copper thieves, and meth heads taught me that preparation beats regret. Those cameras would soon become my bridge to the outside world. The trench widened overnight like an open wound cut into the soil. By dawn the sound of metal treads grinding over gravel had become a constant background hum. What had started as a line of earth now resembled a moat, 6 feet deep, 5 feet wide, and looping closer to a full circle with each pass of the machinery. The only gap left was the narrow driveway to the county road, and even that was now shadowed by bright survey stakes and fresh tire ruts. Every signal pointed to one goal: isolation. Inside the house, the hidden cameras worked without rest. Each motion trigger brought a new file to the private cloud, workers laughing as they dragged survey flags past the fence line, heavy equipment edging into property markers that had been in place since my father's day, and the HOA president herself gesturing toward the well pump, her expression hard beneath the pastel clothes. Time stamps, GPS data, original property markers, all visible in frame. Evidence was no longer anecdotal. It was visual, irrefutable, and stored off-site where no one could touch it. Outside, the siege took on the rhythms of a long campaign. Deliveries stopped arriving. The mail was rerouted. The trash company called to say it could no longer access the bins. I was effectively landlocked, cut off from services, hemmed in by earth and gravel. The HOA called it soil reinforcement. To me it felt like a slow-motion eviction without a court order. The cameras revealed even more than the naked eye. Infrared footage showed late-night visits by unmarked trucks. Workers in reflective vests hauled fencing panels and orange mesh toward the well path. At dawn I found the entire route to the pump blocked by temporary barriers and laminated signs declaring a restricted zone under community review. No county office had issued those notices. When I called the Water Board and Health Department, both denied any approved work in the area. The barriers weren't infrastructure, they were a tactic. Meanwhile, the HOA spun its own version of events on social media. A community alert post appeared on the Sunny Hollow Facebook page describing me as a non-compliant property owner obstructing essential upgrades. Some residents believed it. Others began to ask pointed questions. Was my land even inside the HOA? How was trenching a neighbor's property legal? The post gathered comments like dry leaves, some defending the board, many expressing unease at the medieval optics of digging a moat around a private home. I fed the fire quietly, methodically. Each morning a new clip went public. Trucks blocking the driveway, survey flags moved in the night, the HOA president strolling the edge of the trench like a commander surveying siege lines. My follower count doubled, then tripled. People from out of state began sharing memes. When the HOA becomes a dictatorship, you build a moat, spreading the story far beyond county lines. Even local news reporters took notice. One crew hiked in through the woods to film the scene because the access road was blocked. Still, the HOA doubled down. Gravel trucks arrived early Monday, dumping loads into the open trench near my eastern gate. Workers spread the stone into a suspiciously neat roadway. The laminated badges on their vests read, Sunny Hollow Infrastructure Division, but no such department existed in any county database. When confronted with the original survey marker, they left, but the gravel stayed, packed tight like a driveway to nowhere. By midweek, the tactics shifted again. The cameras captured 2 men in reflective vests attempting to install a fence directly across the path to the well pump, effectively cutting off water access. They claimed to be securing a hazard zone, but left when filmed. I uploaded that footage too, captioned, "They just blocked my water." The clip went viral overnight. The comments section exploded with outrage, tags to local officials, and calls for legal intervention. Behind the scenes, I compiled everything into a master file: videos, stills, maps, timestamp. My lawyer filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief, citing interference with essential infrastructure. The county, once silent, began to stir. A city planner called to apologize, claiming no knowledge of the HOA's actions. A reporter discovered that the permits the HOA had shown deputies were forgeries, their watermarks mismatched, their signatures recycled from old files, one belonging to an official who had been dead for 3 years. The siege was no longer a private dispute. It was a public scandal unfolding in real time. And still the trench deepened, gravel hardened, and barriers multiplied. At night Banjo lay by the door, ears flicking at distant engines. I sat in the workshop with a lukewarm mug of coffee, watching the cameras like a sentry on a battlement, feeling the shift from defense to counterattack building inside me. Because while the HOA had built a moat, I had built something else, a bridge made of surveillance footage, public outrage, and a growing army of online witnesses. Each file uploaded was another plank in that bridge. Each share, each comment, each news story another nail. The siege was turning into a spotlight, and under that glare the pastel facade of the HOA began to crack. The third week of the siege began not with diesel engines at dawn but with low voices in the dark. Banjo's growl woke me first, a deep, steady rumble he reserved for raccoons or very bad ideas. Outside the window flashlights bobbed like fireflies. The cameras captured everything. 2 men in matching HOA security windbreakers unloading concrete blocks from the back of a pickup truck. They weren't patching a hazard. They were filling in the last opening I had cut for supplies, plugging the only narrow path through the trench that still connected me to the outside world. From the porch, the footage looked like something out of a crime drama. Cinder blocks thudding into the moat. Spray-painted markings on each one, codes or batch numbers, glowing under the flashlights. And standing back from it all, silent but unmistakable, the HOA president herself. No clipboard this time, no scarf, just a windbreaker and folded arms, watching as the path was sealed. Her posture wasn't managerial, it was predatory. She had moved from polite pressure to open provocation. Inside, the hidden cameras captured the scene from multiple angles. Overhead shots from a motion-triggered drone, fence post trail cams with infrared, and a porch sensor recording sound. Time stamps locked in every movement. I clipped the files, logged the details, and sent the first batch to my lawyer before dawn. Evidence had turned from slow trickle to flood. But evidence didn't stop the siege. The next night the pickup truck came again, same time, same creeping diesel engine. By then I had stopped sleeping. The porch light stayed off. Banjo lay coiled by the door like a spring. The cameras rolled while I sat in the dark, hands wrapped around a cooling mug, waiting for the inevitable. At 2:43 a.m. the sound came, engine downshifting, tailgate slamming open, boots on gravel. 2 men lifted more blocks, moving toward the trench. Behind them, in the pale beam of a flashlight, the HOA president shifted her weight and raised a hand. Even through the grainy night vision the nod was clear. Continue. This was no longer about property lines or drainage. It was about pressure, intimidation, and control. The moat had become a wall. The wall was becoming a trap. With every block dropped, the escape narrowed. It was the final stage of the siege, and she was watching it like a chess player closing a checkmate. Yet even in that moment, the cameras kept rolling. Each frame another nail in the coffin of her story. Each time stamp another piece of leverage. By morning my lawyer had filed an emergency motion, citing not just unlawful encroachment but criminal trespass and sabotage of essential infrastructure. The county could no longer dismiss it as a civil dispute. The footage was too stark, the tactics too obvious, the public too outraged. But the legal process moved slowly. The trench and blocks moved fast. The day after the midnight delivery, I walked the perimeter to find my last access point reduced to a jagged gap between gravel and concrete, just wide enough for a dog but not a vehicle. Deliveries were impossible. Water barrels had to be hauled by hand. The HOA had managed, without a single court order, to cage a homeowner on his own land. Online, the story had gone from curiosity to wildfire. The clip of the midnight block drop spread across social media. Memes depicted the HOA as pastel-clad medieval warlords building a siege moat. News anchors debated property rights versus HOA powers. Local officials began distancing themselves from Sunny Hollow, issuing statements of deep concern about unverified construction activities. The pastel facade cracked further. I sat in the workshop that night surrounded by screens, footage looping like a security control room. Banjo's head rested on my boot. Outrage had long since replaced fear. There was a fine line between patience and provocation, and it had been crossed in steel-toed boots. Every clip I uploaded tightened the noose, not around me, but around the narrative the HOA had tried to spin. By the fourth week the siege had stopped feeling temporary. Gravel hardened under sun and frost into a pale ring of stone. The trench now looked less like a construction project and more like a deliberate barrier, its edges squared off, its depth constant, a man-made canyon severing a home from the world. Each morning fresh tire tracks appeared near the blocked driveway. Each night the cameras recorded movement. Flashlights, orange vests, figures carrying tools and panels into the dark. What had started as a dispute over land had transformed into a slow-motion assault. Water access had been narrowed to a hand-carried trickle. Deliveries were impossible. Official mail bounced to distant drop boxes. Even friends hesitated to approach, intimidated by construction zone signs strung with plastic tape. Out on the Sunny Hollow Facebook page the HOA continued its story, non-compliant property owner obstructing upgrades, but the narrative no longer held. Screenshots of the midnight block drops and the hidden camera footage were circulating far beyond the county. Local news had run a segment showing the trench with ominous music. Commentators called it medieval and a siege in suburbia. The pastel-clad HOA president had become an unlikely villain in a national meme war. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted from siege to sentry duty. The workshop became a command post. Screens displayed live feeds from trail cams hidden in fence posts, under eaves, inside the garden gnome. Infrared overlays tracked movement. Each file was clipped, tagged, and uploaded to off-site storage. Legal motions were in play. The county had begun to investigate forged permits and misused HOA funds. But the trench remained. And every night the engines returned. By the end of the month patience gave way to resolve. The hidden cameras had done their job, the world was watching. The emergency injunction was being drafted. But on the ground, at 2:43 in the morning, no judge stood between a man and the people dropping concrete blocks into his only exit. The next time they came would not be just another clip uploaded to social media. It would be a line drawn in real time. That night the porch light stayed dark. The rifle hung legal and loaded, slung over one shoulder but pointed at no one. Banjo lay coiled at the door, ears forward, muscles taut. In the distance an engine downshifted, tires crunching over gravel. Tailgate slammed. Boots hit dirt. Two men lifted blocks, moving toward the trench. Farther back, the HOA president shifted her weight, arms folded, eyes fixed on the house. She had watched the siege tighten. Now she was watching the trap close. But what the cameras captured next was not another act of sabotage. It was the pivot point. The moment the homeowner stepped out of the shadows, calm, visible, and unflinching. He did not raise the weapon. He did not shout. He simply stated the facts of property and law, his voice carrying across the trench while the cameras rolled. In that still, tense minute the momentum shifted. The block carriers hesitated, exchanged glances, set their cargo down gently, and backed away. Even through the grainy night vision the HOA president's face changed, smugness dissolving into a brittle mask as she realized the scene was being recorded from multiple angles. The weapon remained lowered, and the words were measured. Minutes later headlights cut through the dark from the county road, sheriff's deputies arriving fast this time, older, serious, wedding rings glinting in the beams. Statements were taken. Footage was handed over. The HOA president refused to speak without counsel. The deputies left with evidence not of a civil disagreement but of a criminal trespass caught on camera from every angle. For the first time since the trench began, the siege faltered. The morning after the midnight confrontation, the land felt different. The trench was still there, raw and open like a wound, but the atmosphere had shifted. Where the night before had been encirclement, now there was exposure. The cameras had captured everything. The deputies had taken copies of the files. The HOA president had left in silence, her SUV rolling away without headlights like a retreating army. In the workshop, screens flickered with a new kind of footage, news segments spliced from the clips I had released. Anchors recapped the story over ominous B-roll of bulldozers and trench lines. Headlines scrolled. HOA surrounds home with trench, hidden cameras reveal alleged property sabotage. Memes still spread, but now they carried links to actual county records and forged permit. Commentators no longer debated if the trench existed. They debated how long it would take for legal action to hit. The emergency motion filed by my lawyer moved faster than expected. The evidence package was too detailed to ignore. Original survey maps, time-stamped videos, screenshots of forged permits, and budget spreadsheets showing HOA funds funneled to private contractors. Even before a judge saw the file, local officials began distancing themselves. A city planner called to apologize. A county trustee publicly stated no authorization had been given for excavation on my boundary. Out on the ground, the siege lines began to sag. Workers who once moved with military precision now lingered, waiting for instructions that never came. The gravel remained, but the dump trucks stopped arriving. The trench was still open, but new stakes didn't appear. The HOA's Facebook posts grew defensive, then erratic, warning of selectively edited footage and outside interference. Residents, once silent, started commenting openly. Why are we paying for this? Wasn't that land never part of the HOA? Are these even legal permits? Inside the house I kept filming. Nothing flashy, just steady documentation. Fence panels left half-assembled, backhoes idle, the well path still blocked by temporary barriers. Each clip went online. Each clip gained traction. My subscriber count surged past numbers I'd never imagined. Reporters left voicemails. Podcasters wanted interviews. One local news crew hiked in through the woods to film the trench firsthand, narrating under the shade of a pecan tree while banjo trotted along the fence line. But the most important development wasn't social media, it was legal. The county registrar confirmed what we had suspected. The permits the HOA had shown deputies were not just outdated, they were forgeries. One signature belonged to a man who had been dead 3 years. Budget records indicated thousands of dollars of HOA dues spent on private security, construction equipment, and even personal landscaping at the HOA president's own home. The siege, once an act of intimidation, had become evidence of fraud. What had begun as a trench around a house had become a trap for the people who dug it. And yet the trench still circled my land, a daily reminder of how far the conflict had escalated. Gravel paths still cut across the boundary. Barriers still blocked the well. I could see the headlines and the legal filings, but from the porch it still felt like living in a besieged castle. Banjo slept with one ear raised. Each night I sat in the dark with coffee cooling beside me, watching the live feeds like a sentry, waiting for the next move. It came not in the form of another midnight incursion, but a summons. An emergency hearing set for the following week. The county had accepted our motion. A judge would decide whether to freeze all HOA activity, order the trench backfilled, and open a criminal investigation. For the first time in weeks, there was a date on the horizon, a chance for the siege to break not by force but by law. The hearing room smelled of old carpet, burnt coffee, and tension. After weeks of trenching and midnight block drops, everything had narrowed to this square of municipal space with flickering fluorescent lights. On one side, My lawyer, calm, composed, a binder thick as a cinder block resting on the table. On the other, the HOA president wrapped in a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than my truck, flanked by 2 attorneys with Bluetooth earpieces and rehearsed smiles. For a month the siege had played out in the dust and mud of my boundary lines. Now it shifted to a place where paper carried more weight than bulldozers. Judge Dunley presided, a cranky veteran of zoning disputes with a reputation for impatience. He read from the docket with clipped precision, an emergency injunction request against Sunny Hollow HOA, filed by a private landowner, alleging unlawful encroachment, infrastructure sabotage, and harassment. The HOA's counsel spoke first. Polished, performative, and carefully vague, he talked about miscommunication and shared community vision. He described the trench as a drainage solution and the midnight block drops as unauthorized subcontractors acting independently. He claimed the surveillance footage was selectively edited and potentially misleading. Every phrase was designed to soften the edges of weeks of aggression. Then my lawyer stood. Her voice didn't rise. It cut. She laid out original survey maps signed and sealed by the county, a timeline of each trench dig and obstruction with matching video stills, a spreadsheet of HOA budget expenditures showing tens of thousands diverted to private contractors without community approval. Each exhibit was placed before the judge like a brick in a wall, the very kind of wall the HOA had tried to build around my home. Finally she produced the clincher. The permits the HOA had waived at deputies, now verified by the registrar's office as forgeries. One signature belonged to a county official dead 3 years. The watermarks didn't match. The file numbers were recycled. This wasn't miscommunication. It was fraud. Across the table, the HOA president paled. Her attorneys stopped scribbling note. The polished narrative cracked like thin ice. Judge Dunley tapped his pen for a long moment before speaking. When he did, the words fell like a gavel, an immediate cease and desist on all HOA activity involving my property, the trench to be backfilled, the well unblocked, access restored within 7 days, a full criminal investigation to follow. The pastel siege had reached its breaking point. The order went out in the judge's dry monotone, but in that small room it felt like a levee giving way. For weeks I had been the man inside the moat. In one afternoon, the moat became evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras. Residents of Sunny Hollow hovered at the edges, some glaring, some whispering apologies. I didn't stop to speak. The fight wasn't over until the trench was gone, the barriers removed, and the well accessible. But the momentum had shifted. The county, the media, and the public were no longer watching me. They were watching the HOA. The ruling landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward through Sunny Hollow faster than any press release could manage. Within 24 hours 3 HOA board members had resigned. One sent an anonymous email, "We were scared to speak out. Thank you." In a community built on whispers and yard signs, silence suddenly felt like a confession. The pastel empire cracked in public view. County deputies served warrants on the HOA offices. Boxes of files, laptops, and ledgers were carried out past rows of stunned homeowners clutching coffee mugs on their porches. Local news cameras captured everything. Anchors narrated over images of pastel blazers being hustled into unmarked sedans, equipment tagged with evidence stickers, and bank accounts frozen. Meanwhile, back at the edge of my land, the machinery began to move in reverse. Not the HOA's bulldozers this time, but county crews in clean uniforms with official logos. Flatbeds arrived to haul away the backhoes and dump trucks that had ringed my property for weeks. Where once engines roared, now diesel rattled in retreat. The siege was ending not with an explosion but with a slow, methodical dismantling. I watched from the porch as county trucks rumbled up, their orange lights cutting across the gray dawn. Banjo sat at my heel, head tilted, watching too. 4 weeks the trench had been a symbol of encirclement. Now it became a channel for backfill, each load of soil erasing another section of the moat. Gravel was scraped away. Stakes pulled up. The orange mesh barriers blocking the well path came down like tattered banners from a lost campaign. News reports filled the airwaves. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to intimidate, unlawful construction. The charges stacked higher with each new discovery. The HOA president, once a pastel-clad commander at the trench line, now appeared in grainy mugshots on local broadcasts. Her name scrolled beneath headlines about HOA abuse of power and Trenchgate. The very tactics meant to isolate me had isolated her from her allies. On the Sunny Hollow Facebook page the tone flipped overnight. Posts once defending the board now apologized, condemned, or simply vanished. Residents who had doubted began sending messages of support, offering bottled water, grocery runs, or just quiet solidarity. The narrative had turned. I was no longer the man trapped inside a moat. I was the homeowner who had endured, documented, and exposed. Even as the moat filled and barriers fell, I kept the cameras rolling. Not out of paranoia now but out of principle, evidence of restoration to balance the evidence of encroachment. Each day new footage showed the trench shrinking, access returning, the land regaining its contours. The siege had become a cleanup operation. But inside the house the habits of siege remained. Coffee cooled beside the monitors. Banjo still slept with one ear raised. I still rose before dawn, checking feeds. Because even as the pastel empire crumbled, the scars it had carved into the soil, and into trust, remained. The trench would be filled, the well unblocked, the driveway restored. But memory was not so easily backfilled. Natural break for next chapter. The final chapter would not be about bulldozers or hearings. It would be about aftermath. Rebuilding fences, reclaiming quiet, and the small metal sign that marked the place where a neighborhood tried to dig a moat around a man's life. They came to fill the trench on a Tuesday morning. County crews, not HOA contractors, with clean machines and official logos. Where weeks earlier the roar of bulldozers had meant entrapment, now the same sound meant restoration. Soil poured back into the moat, smoothing the scar that had ringed my home. Gravel was scraped away, stakes yanked from the ground, and the orange mesh fencing that had blocked my well path fluttered to the dirt like a torn flag. From the porch Banjo and I watched as each section disappeared under fresh earth. The path to the well opened first, then the driveway to the county road, then the southern boundary where the first trench had been dug. In a matter of hours, weeks of spite and intimidation were undone. By noon the land was whole again. For the first time in a month there was no barrier between my home and the horizon. The fallout spread beyond my fence lines. The HOA president, once the pastel-clad commander of the trench, now faced a stack of charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy to intimidate, unlawful construction. Her mugshot appeared on local broadcasts before her SUV was even towed from the Sunny Hollow office. The board dissolved entirely. A county trustee took control of the association's remaining asset. Homeowners who had once whispered behind closed doors now spoke openly about intimidation, misused funds, and secret vote. The pastel facade had collapsed into a legal minefield. 2 weeks later a letter arrived awarding compensation for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress, enough to rebuild fences, repave the driveway, and finally install the storm shelter I had been putting off for years. Yet it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the silence. No bulldozers at dawn, no forged permits waved at deputies, no pastel tyrants measuring grass height. On a crisp morning at the start of spring I began the slow work of reclaiming normal life. New cedar posts went into the soil, 10 feet tall with concrete footings. Boards rose between them, sturdy and clean. At the west side of the property I mounted a small metal plate, nothing flashy, just bold black letters on brushed steel. It wasn't a threat. It was a marker. A reminder of what had happened here and how quickly community improvement could turn into siege tactic. Beyond the sign the land stretched wide and peaceful, cottonwoods leaning in the wind, Banjo thumping his tail against the porch boards. The cameras still stayed in place, not as weapons now but as quiet witnesses. They had turned isolation into exposure, siege into spotlight, and ultimately made the pastel warlords answer for every inch of soil they'd disturbed. The trench was gone, but the footage remained, an archive of how one homeowner had been surrounded, recorded, and then vindicated. As the sun lifted over the horizon, its light fell across freshly filled earth and the dark new fence line. For the first time in weeks, the air held no engine noise, only birds and wind. The siege was over. The home was mine again. And in a world of homeowner associations and hidden agendas, sometimes the only moat you need is preparation, patience, and a well-placed camera.